I'm Kathleen Hicks. I direct the International Security Program here at CSIS, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our second annual, that's said with hope that there'll be further, conversation with the service secretaries. And I should say the secretaries of the military departments is actually the appropriate way to say that. And we're so pleased that they agreed to come back to this forum. It's a unique forum, and I hope you all find it valuable for not just hearing what the priorities are for each individual department, but also some of the ways in which they're working together for the nation. So let me briefly introduce who we have here. We have Secretary of the Army Mark Spencer to my immediate...
Close.
Mark Esper.
Mark Esper. I'm so sorry. I was trying to think it's the Army. I know it's the Army.
Because I had all the wrong notes then.
I will confess I am off
I
of
thought
the
I
red
knew
eye.
brother. It's my older brother.
Yeah. So Mark Esper, 23rd Secretary of the Army, graduate of the U.S. Military Academy, served about 10 years in the Army, including service during the Gulf War. To his left is the Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer. He is the 76th Secretary of the Navy, and he served as a pilot in the Marine Corps, previously also served on the Defense Business Board. And all the way at the end, we have Secretary Heather Wilson, who is the 24th Secretary of the Air Force, graduate of the Air Force Academy, and an Air Force officer herself. And she previously also served in Congress, where her committee assignments included the House Armed Services Committee. Thank you all, secretaries, for coming, even if I can't get Secretary Esper's name right. I appreciate you coming today. Let me start with just a broad question, and maybe we just go down the line. It's 2 years into the administration, a year since the National Defense Strategy has been released. There's been priorities set from the beginning from Secretary Mattis around readiness, and then around essentially structure and capability of the force, and now with the NDS moving into this period of competition, in particular focused on China and Russia. Where do you see the accomplishments to date that are most important for each of your departments, and what are your priorities going forward?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks again, Kathleen, for you and CSIS hosting this. I think it was a very successful last year, and hopefully there will be a third one as well. Let's go back and baseline as well. So about this time last year, the National Defense Strategy came out, and it told us that we are in an era of great power competition, and that our strategic competitors are Russia and China, and that we should focus on high-intensity conflict. A few short months after that, the Army Vision came out, and what the Army Vision laid out was what should the future look like for the Army in the year 2028 in terms of everything we do, from how we man, organize, train, equip, and lead the Army. And really what that did was brought to fore and jump-started what I've been saying is a renaissance in the United States Army with regard to everything we do. So our priorities have remained the same and will. Readiness, number one, modernization, number two, and reform, number three. And reform is the means by which we free up time, money, and manpower to do number one and number two better. I know you want to talk about readiness, but I will just give you a quick metric in terms of how much ground we have reclaimed when it comes to the readiness of our forces. So at the end of 2016, we had 18 brigade combat teams, our most common metric, that were in the top tiers of readiness. Today we have 28. That is a 55% increase in a short period of time, simply because of doing things like more money from Congress, which was extremely helpful, a focus on training, getting back to high-intensity conflict, and a number of other things we can discuss. On the modernization front, as you know, we stood up Army Futures Command. It's the biggest organization of the Army in 45 years. Just prior to that, we had cross-functional teams working on our top 31 programs and other efforts. And in order to make that real, in order to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk, the chief and I led what's now being called the Night Court, where we looked at our entire equipping budget and went through from top to bottom and put all those programs we need to fight and win in the future and funded those first, and frankly divested either through reductions, eliminations, or delays a number of other programs. Now, some may say, why is that important? And so why does the Army need the budget it put forward that should come out in a few weeks? Why is that budget so critical to the Army? It's as simple as this. If we do not modernize the force now, we risk losing a future conflict against Russia or China. It's that simple. We cannot continue to live off vehicles and equipment that came into the Army when I came into the Army in the 1980s. So it is that urgent that we get this done and that we implement that budget. And there's more to that, of course, we can talk about. But our reform measures have helped us fund both of those, and there are a number of other things we've done, and I don't want to occupy all the time here, but we've made a lot of great progress. I'm very happy of how far we've come, and it's a very exciting time in the United States Army.
Great. Secretary Spencer.
I will build right off of what Mark said, because there was no difference in baselining where we started in the United States Navy. I will preface it by saying something that some of you have already heard, that when people ask me what was your biggest surprise when you took over as Secretary of the Navy, having hung around the hoop here with the Defense Business Board and the CNO's executive panel, I thought I knew or had a pretty good insight as to the readiness issues at hand. I was nowhere near close. We had flown the wings off the planes, we had sailed the bottoms off the ship, and we had stretched our troops and our Marines, our sailors and Marines, to the nth degree. With the 17 RAA, the 18-19 budget, ladies and gentlemen, the foundation for readiness has been set. And what we're looking at right now in the United States Navy is everyone understands they have the resources. This is all being done now to the mantra of urgency. We have money, we have plans, we cannot buy time. And that is the biggest stressing point that we have right now. We are reviewing, much like the Army, we're reviewing every single platform that we have. As far as how we're going to go forward with modernization, what we're looking at to acquire and what I call the Force 2.0, which are those weapon systems and concepts that we're developing, that is ongoing as we speak. We look at where we're headed as far as the Navy in general. You've heard the CNO launched his Maritime Superiority 2.0, all about agility and urgency. And we look at conceptuality, which we're reviewing all our concepts on how we fight. We have developed our briefing that we're getting out to the Hill, which is how the Navy fights and how the Navy fights with the Army and the Air Force. We look at geography, how we're now working geography to our advantage. We used to have BMD ships tied to a tether. They're now freely wandering, and we're using what we call surprise and the ability to launch and maneuver as we wish. Instead of just leaving Norfolk and going right over to the Middle East, now we are doing maneuvers along the way. And the last is technology, how we're applying technology for our benefit. It's not just buying it off the shelf, it's working with industry to develop solutions for our problems. And I won't take any more time, but I will say one of the things that we've really done in the last 18 months is try to sit down with industry and say, we are partners in solution providing. And their response to us is, okay, you have to be a responsible client. I get it. I have to be clear on what I need and what I can provide. And in that case, the biggest thing that we can provide right now is consistent funding to allow our partners in the private sector to spend the R&D dollars to provide us the solutions that we need.
I think probably the thing that's changed most in the years since the publication of the National Defense Strategy is a greater awareness in both, really across this town, in the Congress and also among the American people, that the threat has changed and that we need to prepare for the reemerged era of great power competition. Having a budget on time and an authorization bill on time has made a tremendous difference to the Air Force this year. One of the things that the Congress did and directed the Air Force to do was to say, all right, we've got the National Defense Strategy. What is the Air Force we need in order to implement the National Defense Strategy? And that report is due to Congress on the 1st of March. This was a really, I think, important piece of work. It is a piece of work that indicates, and it's no surprise to anyone here, that the Air Force is too small for what the nation is asking us to do. When Mark went to war in the Middle East, we had 401 operational squadrons supporting the joint fight. Today we have 312, and it is an old fleet, and it is much smaller. So we have to cost effectively modernize the force and increase its capability and change the way we fight in order to implement the National Defense Strategy. We have been for 2 years restoring the readiness of the force to fight, any time. And like Richard, I was very surprised by the decline in the readiness of the force over the last 2 decades. And that's no knock on the airmen who are out there doing the job every day. They didn't have the time, the white space, the equipment, In some cases, the people. For us, readiness is first and foremost about trained people. 2 years ago, we were 4,000 maintainers short in the United States Air Force. As of December, we are fully manned in maintenance for our active duty units. So we have closed that gap. Now we have to season those people to make them exceptional airmen on the flight line. So restoring the readiness of the force is job one for us. And then cost-effective modernization. We are trying to buy things faster and smarter. The Congress gave all three of us a lot more authorities in 2016 and 17, and we are aggressively implementing those authorities to get things from the lab bench to the flight line faster. There are a lot of different examples of that, but when we use these authorities, when we enhance competition and get more innovative companies involved in providing services and equipment to the military, it also saves money. The Air Force had 4 major procurements in the last quarter of last year. We have the new trainer, we had the new GPS satellite, we had the replacement helicopter, and we had a contract for launch services for our satellites, for rocket launches. Those 4 procurements were very competitive. And because of that competition, we actually saved $17 billion, which we were then able to put towards other things that the military services need. So we are using the authorities given to us to buy things faster and smarter, and we're building the Air Force we need for the high-end fight.
So some of you have mentioned threads of what I'm about to ask, but I'll ask it more directly from Secretary Wilson, maybe coming this way. What is the priority for you in your message to Congress? Preview for us a little bit in your posture statements. What do you most need Congress to help you with? Is it new authorities? Is it the consistency of the budget?
I think with respect to the Congress, first of all, I think we've benefited over the last two years from explaining to the Congress what is the threat and the emerging threat. What is America going to be facing? And there is a consensus, I think, bipartisan in the Congress of the need to provide for the nation's defense. That top-line growth has made a tremendous difference, and the certainty of timing has made a difference. We had a budget on time. I looked at our first quarter results in the Air Force. We actually executed about a quarter of our budget in the first quarter of the year. We were able to do new starts of programs and cut contracts, and our flying hours in the first quarter was slightly above 100% of plan. That is tremendously important to continue to train the force, is to be able to use that first quarter, and in some cases, first 2 quarters of the year with having a budget. So the budget and the top line is important. Getting it on time is important, and maintaining a strong national defense overall.
I can only beat the drum harder that Heather has started to beat. You heard me just a minute ago. Consistent funding is the message that we have to have up on the Hill. The only thing that I would add is that we do have to get after reformation. We've been after it. But the fact of the matter is, with the audit, we have a management tool now, and we're building tools around it that allow us to really see, in the true sense of portfolio management, where we are putting our resources, what we expect to get a return on that investment, and how we are actually tracking that return on investment. So we actually have a credible tool to come back and say, Congress, thank you for the money. Here's the output metrics versus just the input metrics of how we're getting after national security.
Predictable, adequate, sustained, and timely budgets. That's my message to Congress. Predictability is critical not just for me, for the service, but it's also important for our industry partners. In the Army, what we tried to lay out are our 6 modernization priorities. They have unchanged now for 18 months. And it's that predictability that allows our industry partners to do their own investment in R&D and to meet us on the other side in terms of next generation. Adequate goes without further explaining, and same with sustained. The timeliness is also critical. Secretary Wilson mentioned that. Last year was the first year we had a timely budget, and it meant I could fill all my training seats. It meant that I can conduct all my training on time. That was critical to us, making sure we can improve our BCT readiness. So all those things are critical. And again, obviously for me, there will be big shifts in our budget, big shifts to help us fund training, and certainly on the equipping side. And it's worth repeating, if I'm not able to make that shift from the legacy to the future, we risk losing the first fight of the next war.
Specifically on authorities with regard to acquisition and more generally modernization, working with industry, et cetera, do you all have the authorities you think you need?
I think we have sufficient authority right now. We'll probably be asked that question, and I'll, the same thing, I'll poll my staff and see if we need more.
Yeah.
I think we need to make sure we understand what those authorities are within the building so that we have clear lines in terms of how we can proceed on exercising them.
I would agree with that. It's one of those times where I think we can say we have everything we need that we think we need right now. Let us digest and actually affect those authorities that you've given us, which some of them are terrific. They really are. It allows us to really speed up and be quick and agile on our acquisition and time to front line. I also underscore what Mark said, which was now inside the building, we have to met out how we're going to use these authorities and who's involved with these authorities.
I think that Congress recognized that speed matters. We've got a rapidly innovating adversary, and we have to pick up the pace of innovation. That means that we have to set up an acquisition system that we govern and oversee, but where we have empowered program managers who spend more time managing their programs than they spend managing the Pentagon, where lines of accountability and authority are very clear, and they get the support that they need from headquarters to do the job we're asking them to do. I think there is still remnants of the large bureaucracy within which we work who think that their job is to still check the checkers, and we are constantly trying to discourage them from doing that and shift their professional lives to things that add value.
On those lines, what are the tools or the levers you are finding most valuable for changing that culture to an innovation culture? And I'll leave it pretty broad like that because it may vary where you find your pain points. Secretary Esper?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
I think for us, there is a risk aversion within the modernization enterprise that I found coming in, and it's been well reported probably for all of us. So I think for us, the biggest change was, of course, to stand up Army Futures Command. If you can affect that organizational change, that is a key part. The next are process changes, and those are well underway. The third is picking the right leader, and I think in General Mike Murray down in Austin, Texas now, we've picked the right person. He understands DC and innovation and working with industry well. And I think if you have those three things, then you can shift the culture. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing, is to shift the culture so folks are focused on the outcome and not the process, so that they feel empowered to take a managed risk in terms of their programs, and they're not focused on checklists. That's what we need to get to, and that's I think then through me beating that drum and the undersecretary and everybody else within that whole modernization enterprise doing that, that's what will get us there. It takes time, but I think with those elements in place, we're moving in the right direction.
Any other thoughts?
Kath, I think it really is, stemming off of what Mark said, it is a leadership issue. We have the tools that we need, they're on the table, and now it's up to leadership to say, pick up the tool and bang it around and use it. If I look at the three priorities that I have, which haven't changed since being on the deck, which are people, capabilities, and process, and the underscore there is the best person who can probably provide a solution to a problem is the person directly looking at the problem. I don't have the best solution where I am. I can move big rocks of policy and dollars, but the actual tactical solution is at the problem level. We have really been pushing that down in the Navy Marine Corps team. I look at how the Marine Corps and the Navy have stepped out on additive manufacturing. The Marine Corps' title to it is print it forward. So we're getting both an increase in expedition, and we're also getting an increase in effectiveness and efficiency in that regard. But that's the culture that's changing. It's on the front line going up versus coming down to actually use the tools we have. On the bigger acquisition issues, we're using some great authorities that have been given to us to really expedite things. And you can see that what's happening with the frigate. You can see that happening with the MQ-25, larger programs that we have the ability to expedite.
I would say a couple of things. In 2016 and 17, the Congress gave us new authorities to prototype as an alternative to traditional acquisition. We're using those very aggressively. Let me give you just one example. Next generation engines. next generation engines for aircraft. Instead of doing a 5-year study and setting requirements and getting a big stack of paper at the end of that and then going out with an RFP when you have no idea what you really can build, we instead, with the 2 largest engine manufacturers, or 2 of the 3 largest engine manufacturers in America, led a prototyping contract and said, build us an engine. The goal is to get a 25% increase in thrust, or rather 10% increase in thrust, and a 25% increase in fuel efficiency. See what you can do. Very competitive, very ambitious technically. The Air Force spends $5 billion a year on jet fuel. If we can get a 25% increase in fuel efficiency in the next generation engine, it changes our tanker requirements, it changes the cost of fuel, it changes all kinds of things about the way we fight. We're using a prototyping authority to do that. We'll see what's possible, and then we'll set the requirements for the next generation of engine. So prototyping experimentation is one. The other thing I would say is the 3 services are working very well together on a variety of things. And one example is hypersonics. A hypersonic weapon has a lot of, and bombs have various parts, shells, rocket motors, explosive packages. The Army, we signed an MOU about a year ago on hypersonic weapons. The Army and the Navy had come up with a shell that they were able to get to hypersonic speeds, 5 times the speed of sound, and maneuver it. Ours didn't work. So, but what we have is rocket engines that we think are better than the ones that they had developed. And so we got our engineers working together. We have a Navy-funded, Army-tested shell of a weapon with an Air Force rocket motor that's going to go on it. We're going to drop it off an aircraft. You guys are going to put it on a ship, and they're going to launch it from the ground. And by working together, we stripped 5 years out of the likely fielding time for a hypersonic weapon.
It's the purple bomb.
Yeah, the grape.
Secretary Esper, you have mentioned, of course, Futures Command is an organizational change. Secretary Wilson, you have the Space Force issue set. Can you talk a little bit, maybe starting with Secretary Wilson and then coming down the line, how you're managing the tension, if you will, of organizational design change versus the push to kind of move, act, form follows function, if you will. Sort of, there is this tension, I think, that many are talking about whether it's best to sort of make the organizational design right and then move out, if you will, to achieve the substantive goal, or whether it's smarter to invest that energy in just moving out on the substantive goal. I know both of your services have had to deal with this, and maybe Secretary Spencer has a similar example. How are you managing that, Secretary Wilson?
Let me take the example. I'll talk about space, but one of the best examples is the Army has Futures Command. We established, just as I arrived, the Air Force Warfighting Integration Center. And our issues and problems were different, but the purposes of those institutions are really the same, which is to get after how are we going to fight the future fight, and how does that then reflected in the budgets that we put forward. So we started the Air Force the Warfighting Integration Center that looks across all of our stovepipes and designs, looks at alternative futures, and then uses them to drive what we buy and what we put in our programs. In that case, it was really getting the buy-in from the organization to do that. It was more internal rather than externally pushed. With respect to space, what we're trying to deal with now is that space has become a warfighting domain. We are the best in the world at space, and our adversaries know it. And they're seeking to develop the capability to deny us the use of space in crisis or war. We have to confront that reality. And the Air Force has developed both strategies and programs to be able to defend what we do on orbit and provide to the joint force. Whatever structure organizationally comes out of this next session of Congress, our responsibility is to make sure that we can fight and win and continue to provide that service to the joint force.
Go ahead, Secretary Esper and Secretary Spencer.
Sure. We explored numerous courses of action over many, many months to come up with what ultimately became Army Futures Command. And so that process allows all the stakeholders to really voice their ideas, their concerns, their issues. And so it has its own socialization in and of itself. And as I said before, the end state that Futures Command will achieve this summer will not be the end state. I mean, it will continually change. If it doesn't, then it's missing something. But it's not just, again, the organization piece. There are the processes that we develop, the cross-functional teams that are built into it. We're moving aggressively toward best value contracts, for example, how we do contracting differently, even small things like changing the name. So we recently moved Research, Development and Engineering Command into Army Futures Command as another phase, and it was renamed Combat Capabilities Command, Development Command. So think of the name difference alone sends a signal that you're not about just doing research and development, you're about developing combat capabilities. Last week I was in Pittsburgh because we stood up our AI task force there at Carnegie Mellon University, another milestone for Army Futures Command, which sends the signal internal to the Army and outside toward academia and industry. We had a number of industry partners there as well, as we're trying to get out, be more accessible. So there are a number of things that we try to do as we stood up Army Futures Command to bring everybody along and make sure they understand what we're doing. And internal communication is always a constant you have to keep pushing on to make sure everybody gets the word, they understand what you're doing, the whys and everything else.
Secretary Spencer, any?
For fear that some of you might be worried the Navy hasn't stood anything up, what we did, we actually used existing crucibles that we had. If you look down at Quantico at McCittick, the Marine Corps Development Center, and then you look up at Newport at the War College, our two primary crucibles that we do for testing experimentation on both concept technology and deliverabilities, we've really amped up the game there. And that's where we're focusing. But one of the things that I want to say, which is, again, keying off what Heather just said earlier, I sat there in one of our breakfasts that we have every 2 weeks and said, wow, you have Integrated Warfare Center, new Futures Command, let's get Navy and Marine installed in both of these. So we're hearing about it real time and can adopt and adapt and bring it in, rather than traditional stovepiping where we might read about it in the paper and call each other up and go, wow, can I get a slice of that?
In fact, that was just 2 weeks ago, we've decided we've got a three-party hostage exchange going on our Warfighting and Integration Center and Army Futures Command and the Navy Warfighting Center, so that we're working together and across the services.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that, which is, if you look at cyber, if you look at data links, the jointness of the challenge set ahead. You've just given a very concrete example. Are there others that come to mind where you all are trying to push beyond the boundaries of, the cultural difficulties and even just the system process difficulties of making sure that, the Army's vehicles fit on the Air Force's planes, et cetera?
I like to view our cultural differences and the way we operate as assets rather than obstacles. And I think if you look at it that way, it completely changes your perspective in terms of how you fight. Look, I think the success of the American military has been, at least since World War II, the fact that we fight as a joint force, a combined force. And it makes us unique in many ways. The more that we can move closer and closer together, the better. Army is working on our new doctrine called multi-domain operations. We released version 1.5 in December. It's another key line of effort for the Army to modernize in the future. It's in our vision for 2028. But as I think I said this time last year, it envisions a new type of way that we operate and how we organize so that I can support, for example, the Air Force with long-range suppressive fires to go after enemy air defense systems at great distances. And the same thing with the Navy. If I can support the Navy in the South China Sea with long-range cannons that we're actually developing now, it allows us to work cross-domain, supporting one another in different ways. And of course, for us, multi-domain is not just the air domain and Navy, but it's cyber, space, and then of course, electromagnetic spectrum as well.
If you're to take the F-35 as an example, one of the goals obviously is to have a platform in the air that can call on any platform to deliver any weapon. It's an aggressive goal, but if you take that as a primary understanding, when the three of us are together, we're going, wow, the Joint Chiefs have been practicing jointness. Now the Title 10 people are actually enforcing jointness. To give you an example, one of the things that we are working on is getting back to this concept of who's supporting and who is supported. And that goes across the board in everything that we look at to make sure that we're aligning ourselves. And the three of us are completely aligned on our overall goals, wearing our Title 10 hats. And now we're aligning resources not only internally but externally to our organizations.
Let
give you two examples. One of them is we signed a joint memo. It's probably kind of boring in some ways, but it probably is one of the most important things we've done together, which is we signed a joint memo to each of our service acquisition executives on interoperability of communications. So there has to be, we call it an open mission systems architecture, so that everybody has standards for communications and everybody knows what the other standards are. So in other words, you can have a Verizon phone and you can have an iPhone, but you can talk to each other,
right,
because there is a standard for interoperability. If we're going to multi-domain operations, which is also part of the Air Force approach to this, we need to be able to have any sensor connect to any shooter at very rapid machine-to-machine speed. So the ability to communicate and know what those standards are, and that all of our equipment will be done that way in all three services. That's a very big deal. I would say the other thing is kind of a very practical thing. We do have breakfast together and every 2 weeks, and we're working about 20 things at any one time. No staff there. Terrifies the Pentagon.
Yes.
Rightly so.
But what it's also caused is, and I've noticed this, is because we have breakfast together. I think before we have breakfast together, like our assistant secretaries for installations get together, our general counsels get together, our military assistants get together, because I think what they say is, okay, we better sort this out, because if we give it to them, we have no idea what they'll do. And so what it has really focused is a much greater alignment up and down the services and sharing of information and solving problems and getting after it.
Yeah, that puff of white smoke comes out of one of our offices, and they know that new mandate's coming down.
Yes,
and,
right.
What do you mean we have to work with the Air Force on this, or the Navy?
That's right.
So sorry, guys, we fight jointly.
Secretary Spencer, audit. You mentioned it in your opening comments. Can you each talk, starting with you and maybe going to Secretary Wilson and Secretary Esper, about the way in which, some concrete examples of how you're using the results of the audit to better get at some of these reform priorities?
Yep. This is probably one of the best tools that we've been given, and a lot of people approach this going, okay, we're finally going to be able to balance the financial numbers. That's just the tip of the iceberg. What's coming out of the audit is a management tool. I'll give you one example, and I'll back up for a second. This is the Navy's first time through the audit ringer. We will probably not get an unqualified audit for maybe 5 to 6 to 7 years, but that shouldn't disappoint anyone. The learning curve that we are undergoing right now is stunning. I'll think of one right now. Well, we have 700 distribution points in the United States Navy. If I'm not mistaken, Amazon does it with 25. I think we have room for improvement. This is how we're using the tool. So it's not just where are your dollars and cents and where did you spend them. You can now see, when I referred earlier, where we're making the investment and what the return on our investment is. This is where the audit comes in. We also have launched in HIP 2 audit is our performance to plan tool. So now managers, quote unquote, anywhere along the line of management, have the ability to see what the goal is, what the resources they're putting towards there, and what the output is. We've truly suffered, and I use the word suffered because we focused on being an input organization. We are judging how much we put in. We really now are switching the view to go input is balanced with output and metrics to manage the output, and that is the audit.
To me, I've had audits as a state agency and a university and with small businesses and on boards of public corporations, and they are a tool to identify issues that need to be addressed. So to me, an audit is a tool. As there are findings, we divide them into buckets on their significance and so forth. We develop a corrective action plan for every finding, and then we execute the corrective action plan. So for me, it is a tool for improvement. In addition to this external audit, the Air Force has an internal audit function. I assume we all do, but we do audits all the time on issues, performance problems, and we're constantly looking at ways in which we improve systems and processes. So to me, the audit is a tool. It is one more tool in our kit to continue to improve performance.
You're going to hear much of the same from me. It's just a very important tool. It's a matter of perspective. If you see it as a threat, then it becomes difficult. You got to see it as an opportunity to see yourself better, to help you find things. And we found, much like Richard said, we had too many data centers, for example, where we didn't have good accountability over our mobile devices. But if you view it as a tool, and the auditors are usually very good to work with you, they're trying to help you, it can be a great way to make sure your force is more effective and certainly more efficient. And as Heather said, the Army has its own audit agency, and I work with them closely in terms of, this is what I want you to accomplish in the next year. Go audit these things and come back and give me feedback. It's a great tool. Audits are great tools to help you perform better.
I'm going to ask one more question down the line, and then we're going to open it up to the audience, so please start thinking of your questions. I do want to make sure we hit on people, which I have not given you the opportunity to talk much about. As service secretaries, you own the schoolhouses, if you will, the training elements, all under your watch. And here we have this significant shift in the environment, or an acknowledgement of an existing shift in the environment, both sort of this high-end competition, but also to this shifting landscape of challenges below the level of warfare. What are the most pressing priorities for each of you with regard to how to move forward the education and training elements of the force and the retention elements?
That's a good question. I think, again, for me, it will go back to the budget, the Army budget, because what we've done in there is we've reformed and shifted dollars. We wanted to make sure that we placed an emphasis not with regard to just moving the Army into the future from an equipping standpoint, but from a training and personnel standpoint. So the reforms, the changes we made helped us fund things such as this, an extended Army infantry basic training, which now goes from 14 weeks to 22 weeks. It's the toughest in the world, I'd like to say, and I was with that class, a class in November, watching them train, and the results are dramatic. Between an extended basic training and now we have a drill sergeant to recruit ratio of like 1 to 12, you're seeing young soldiers with much higher physical fitness scores, much more competent tactically and technically, and I think it'll produce a whole lot better product for the operational force. That's one example. I'm using that funding to help make sure I have the equipment and everything I need to improve the health and fitness of the force. We adopted a brand new Army combat fitness test, which for the first time really links physical fitness with the demands and rigors of the battlefield through a new 6-element test. But to do that, I need to purchase equipment. I need to train people. We're also putting down in our maneuver battalions, our aspiration is to put physical therapists, occupational therapists, nutritionists, and sports trainers to really start looking at our soldiers as professional athletes, if you will. And what that will mean is in the future, once these take place and really take hold, is we'll have a more deployable, a more capable force. And those are just two good examples. We could talk about talent management. My ambition is to overhaul the Army personnel system with a market-based talent management approach, and that is well underway, and that'll be my priority for this year. But there are a number of things we're doing to make sure we get at the people issue. At the end of the day, the Army is a people business, and people are our most important, our most valuable asset.
I'll go back to my 3 priorities: people, capabilities, and process. People are our most valuable asset, and not surprisingly, they are our most expensive asset. So we have to manage them appropriately. We just finished a study that the Under led called Education for Sea Power. In my whole business career, I've always had mentors who said, Richard, go after the root cause. Don't prune the tree. Look for the limb that needs to be removed, or look to the limb to see why it's growing the way it's going. We really came back to education in the Navy enterprise as to be one of the biggest levers that we can control. We are focusing our resources and our assets from professional education, from deck plates on all the way up to flag officers, how we assign people after we educate them, why we educate them to do what they do, and then if we do that correctly, put them in an area where that education will benefit the service. Sounds like a brilliant flash of the obvious. We might be a little rusty at that, to be frank with you. So we're getting after the education side of things. If you look at what we're doing out of the Naval Postgrad School, we were scratching our head wondering if we really were efficient and effective in getting outside the wire, because one of my drums that I beat to everybody up and down the ladder, uniformed and civilians, If you're acquiring things, if you're looking for problems, solutions to your problems, look outside the wire. Because I will almost guarantee you, some organization out there, whether large corporate, middle corporate, small company, has probably gone through the same problem you are or have a solution or something that looks like your solution. This goes to should cost before you find out what it does cost. Frame your argument, frame your data that you can glean from the outside. One thing that we have learned, and I'm getting off a bit here, but I want to stress this. One thing that we have learned in this exercise is that corporate America and academic America will bend over backwards to help the services of this country, and it's fascinating. I want to get back to training real quickly. We had the 2 events over in the Pacific, which was our cathartic event. We set up the CR and the SRR, which were the reviews, my review and the CNO's review. 110 accepted. The recommendations were at about 89 of them. But it wasn't just surface warfare where this came in. Every community is looking at themselves and saying, okay, how can we do this better? And while the institutional framework is there and support is there to how can you do it better, we're letting it go down to the command level on how they believe they can do it best they can. And if they find something that works terrifically, share immediately with the other organizations within your command. There was a great article, Kessler Run, where our P8 community had developed their own software. Enhanced it outside of the P8 existing institutional software and developed it amongst their own community. This is the kind of thing that we're trying to get after in both training and operational development operationals.
Great. Secretary,
I think when it comes to people in the Air Force, the beating heart of the Air Force is the squadron. And the chief and I have been very focused on trying to restore the health and strength of the squadron, its squadron leadership teams, and give this, after sequester, a lot of the support for the squadrons was stripped out. And our people were really overextended. They were overworked. They were over-deployed. And so we're trying to restore the support for the squadron and the life of the squadron, because that's where the culture of the Air Force is set. I think also with respect to people, there are some things that we're doing with respect to assignments. For example, we are shifting this year, all officers will be assigned through a talent marketplace, which is kind of it's a software tool to be able to go in and look at where all the assignments are, bid on your top 3, see how many other people are. It's much more, and then we do a matching algorithm. So it's not just somebody down in San Antonio, Texas looked at a spreadsheet and congratulations, you're going to Malmstrom and your wife is going to California. I mean, so we are trying to meet more needs of more airmen on their preferences and their career path. And I think the final thing I would mention has to do with the resilience of the force. We all 3 have this issue, but how do we provide support in the squadrons so that our force is more resilient long term, and we have something called Task Force True North, which really comes out of the special operations community, and putting the physical therapists, the counselors, the chaplains in the units, so that if somebody has an issue or a problem, that they don't have to go across the base and walk into somebody's office and say, hey, I need help. Because the person that they're going to get help from is working with them every day and saying, hey, Mark, what's going on? You don't seem like yourself today. Let's talk about this. So trying to strengthen the resilience of our people long term.
Great. Okay. As promised, we're going to open it up. I ask that when I call on you, wait for the mic, stand up, tell us your name. 1 question, please. We will start here with Sydney.
Thank you, ma'am. Secretaries, thank you all very much for doing this again. Sidney Friedberg from Breaking Defense. I'm hearing lots of great things about jointness, about common, well, at least knowing what each other's standards are for interoperability, about building some things like harness together. What I'm not hearing, I hear multi-domain on this side of the stage, and I hear multi-domain on this side of the stage, but I don't think I've ever heard a Navy person endorse that concept in those words. And it certainly seems like it resonates a lot of things the Navy is already doing on distributed lethality, electromagnetic warfare. So is the Navy going to officially sign up to this? This is a joint concept? Is the Navy having reservations, or is there all sorts of stuff happening behind the scenes that just isn't labeled that we don't know about?
It would be the latter. I mean, you talk about multi-domain. I look at the air wing of an aircraft carrier. It can shoot a ship, it can shoot a plane, it can deliver power to project power on land. I look at the P-8. It can launch a Hellfire, I beg your pardon, a harpoon. It can launch a torpedo, and it can also be your information gatherer, your surveiller. I look at the LCS with the multi-mission modules. I mean, we are in multi-domain every single day. That we didn't sign up and say it's something new, I apologize.
All right, let's see, how about right here?
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Mizell, Air Force Fellow over at Georgetown. Ma'am, sir, thanks so much for your leadership. You talked about innovation, Secretary Spencer. You mentioned the MQ-25. Any chance you can give us a quick update on the MQ-25 in the coming year? And Secretary Wilson, is the Air Force going to leverage this with its thirst for RPA technology, automated wingmen, all that stuff? Is it going to leverage the Navy's opportunity here with that new platform? And is it at least going to make its next generation fighter compatible to be able to operate with the Navy there for your interoperability piece?
Air Force Fellow setup on you right there.
Exactly.
It's a plant.
Let me
One
hit
question
you
with 18 parts.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that
I
was
know.
actually 2 questions with 18 parts, but.
Yes. The MQ-25 industry really leaned in on that. And I think we're going to see some really exciting things hipping off of a trip that I know I took and I think Heather just took to look at the trainer and how they're manufacturing out there. I think we're going to get some benefits on the MQ-25 on material design and manufacture. We're just going to try to push that as fast and as hard as we can. That's kind of the bottom line for the MQ-25.
With respect to refueling generally, I just flew with the first KC-46 from Everett, Washington, down to McConnell Air Force Base in Kansas. Felt very sorry for the co-pilot on his, it was his 3rd sortie, and he's got the head of Air Mobility Command and the Secretary of the Air Force in the cockpit with him. I felt for the guy, but so we're taking delivery of the KC-46. Of course, we do strategic tanking. So it's more of a global perspective of how do we drag somebody anywhere, anytime, globally. The MQ is a little bit more of a regional, or protect the carrier, fuel the fighters out a little further. So it's a different mission. I think the most important thing is that all of these missions work together. The Air Force continues its unmanned aerial vehicle enterprise. And we'll continue to drive that forward. It's the part of the enterprise that has grown significantly in spite of the fact that the Air Force itself has gotten smaller and smaller. The unmanned force has gotten larger and larger.
Okay, great. I've got one right back here, yes.
Or
Yeah.
remotely piloted, not unmanned.
Thank you. Hi, Connie Lee from National Defense. Secretary Esper, you talked about shifting dollars away in order to fund all the priorities that you listed. So with the upcoming budget request, what should we expect to look out for in terms of what programs or priorities may have had some of those dollars shifted away?
Well, I can't get into details, of course, until the budget comes out, but you will, we did shift dollars dramatically into the future next generation projects defined by our cross-functional teams. There are at least 31 programs there, and there's a whole other tier right beneath them that also represent our future technology investments. And what you will see is that we shifted money out of programs that the chief and I assessed that while they had value, they in some cases we were producing too many of them. In some cases, they were unnecessary upgrades that we could live without. In some cases, they may have been duplicative with other systems. And so you've heard the numbers. Nearly 200 programs were reduced or eliminated or delayed. And again, it's not just a big chunk of that comes out of the equipping budget, but we were able to later in the fall also go after our training, our installation, our sustainment and manning budgets. Much of those changes will come out in the next budget cycle. But we're already beginning now the round 2 for our equipping budget for FY21. So this is going to be a process that continues on and on. We got to keep sharp pencils and constantly look to the future because dollars are tight. Congress is watching, We need to be good stewards of the taxpayers' generosity, and we need to plan for the future. So we cannot cling to the past. We cannot cling to legacy systems. We need to get to the future if we're going to fight and win against the Russians and Chinese.
Okay, I'm going to go back over here, way in the back here. Just wait for the microphone, it's coming.
Hi, my name is Chloe. I'm a graduate student at American University. And all three of you talked about developing military men or women while they're in the service. And I think Secretary Wilson, you touched on this a little bit, but how or what programs have you created to develop military service people as they're leaving the military? As I'm sure you all know, suicide rates, homeless rates are very, very high among veterans. So is there anything that you're doing before they leave the service to affect that or stop that?
Great question. You want to start?
I'm actually not sure that suicide rates are higher among veterans than they are in the general population. So I'd encourage you to look at that. Let me flip this question around a little bit and talk about some of the things we're doing to inspire the next generation to choose to serve. One of the things that we found in the Air Force is that a smaller and smaller percentage of Americans have a propensity to choose to serve. And so we need to broaden that out. And particularly among pilots, we find that while we have a very diverse force in the Air Force, 20% women, significant percentage of minorities, a small percentage of them choose to actually fly, either remotely piloted aircraft or piloted aircraft. And we wanted to change that because it makes a difference long term for the leadership of the Air Force. So we partnered with junior ROTC. We looked at our junior ROTC units, and our junior ROTC units are 53% minority. And these are high school kids who have said they're interested in some way in aviation. So last summer we started a program with junior ROTC in 8 colleges and universities that teach flying. And we put out they had to write an essay and get a letter of recommendation and turn in their grades and things. They had to be in junior ROTC in good standing, high school kids. And we sponsored 170 of them for 7 weeks on a college campus to learn to fly. We found that minorities and women, if you ask an Anglo man in the Air Force, when did you decide you wanted to fly? They say, I was in 5th grade. It's much younger than women and minorities. Women and minorities are more likely to say high school or college. So let's go to them when they're thinking about this and plant the seed. So, and of those 170 kids, 90% of them get their private pilot's license. There's no commitment to join the Air Force. We know we have a shortage of pilots in this country. We hope that we planted the seed with the next generation to inspire them to choose to serve in the United States military.
Secretary Esper, you had something.
Sure. No, I agree with what Heather's saying. I would argue that there's no better institution in the United States of America than the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines in preparing young people for the future. We teach loyalty, we teach service, we teach honor, duty, management, leadership. We provide valuable skills. My concern is much like Heather said, is the propensity to serve is on a steep decline, and the ability to serve, being qualified, is as well. More troubling is I tend to find, because the Army has launched a comprehensive overhaul of our recruiting apparatus. So we're more recruiters on the streets, overhauling our websites, social media campaign, everything. But we also launched a 22-city campaign where we go to 22 of America's largest cities. And what we're finding is in many locales, and I think you've written about this as well, is we're finding that schools are not letting our recruiters in, or counselors are not even presenting as an opportunity the chance to serve your country. It's considered that the only path to success is college, and that there are no other paths. And I just think we need to do a better job across America in our school districts, our states, our cities, to present the American military as a great path to the future. Whether or not you serve 30 years, 20 years, or 3 years, I just think no institution will do a better job preparing one's young daughter or young son for anything they confront in life.
To answer your question, yes, we actually have programs to assist in the transitioning, as does the Air Force and the Army, but I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I'm putting the majority of my resources to retain people. because the amount of money that we spend to train warrants that. That being said, those that either do not want to stay or that we do not want to have stay, we owe them the ability to transition out to the private sector. And we've enhanced those programs, I would say, dramatically over the last 5 to 10 years. If I look at what we have done as 3 service secretaries, we've worked with the Council of Governors to make sure that licensing, the initial problem that we were trying to solve was families being transitioned around the country, but it also goes into active duty transitioning out into the workforce to be able to have a corpsman, a corpsman 3 be able to be an EMT in multiple states and have the licensing be accepted. And we're working with the governors to get after that. So yeah, we're all in there making sure that those who do not want to stay or we don't want to have stay have the resources available to them to make a transition.
Okay, we have time probably for only one more question. And let me see, I guess Sandy right here, you've been very patient, so we'll go there. Oh no, I'm sorry, Tony, it was up here. we'll do it back to back. That's okay. We'll go to Sandy and then we'll go to Tony and then we're done. So we'll ask 2 back to back.
Oh, thank you. For Secretary Esper and all of you, Sandy Apgar, CSIS. You've committed to put more funding into childcare and other family services. Have you looked at the authorities that you have under the military privatization initiatives already to enlist both private capital and business in these, frankly, social and community services?
And just hold on the answer and we'll go back here for the other one. Go ahead.
Tony Capacity with Bloomberg News. It's tough to segue with that one. You've all mentioned the conflict with Russia potential. Can you give examples, real world examples, where multi-domain operations enabled by this new modular open system architecture would play out in the battlefields of Europe or on the high seas in a conflict with Russia, assuming it doesn't go thermonuclear in a day?
Okay,
Let me start out
go very
with that
far. You have public-private partnerships and
child care and
thermonuclear war.
multi-domain
Yes.
operations.
Child care and thermonuclear.
Let me start out with multi-domain.
Yes, please, go ahead.
So let me give you an example. The United States Air Force operates 80 satellites. Some of them provide communications. Some of them do missile warning. So an Air Force satellite detects and locates operations on the ground. That information can be sent directly to forces in the field, so that a Navy ship or an Army battalion can redirect fires and destroy things. So any sensor, any shooter, that's where we want to get to. So it is linking up in near real time, space, air, manned, unmanned, ground, and sea, so that when we detect a problem, everybody knows about it, and the fires are directed to be able to overwhelm an enemy before they even know what's going on. Now, childcare, there you go, over to you.
Can I follow up on yours real quick?
Go ahead.
Tony, last year, the multi-domain task force that the Army has stood up out in the Pacific conducted an exercise. In that exercise, an Apache helicopter from the cockpit guided a drone forward to locate in the distance a Navy target ship. That drone, through the Apache, relayed targeting data back to a ground-based Army rocket system, and I think a Navy ship as well to engage it. To me, that's multi-domain operations, or at least a good example of it.
That was an intentional Navy ship target zone.
It was Billy Mitchell who came in.
Exactly. I'll go to childcare for 100. I think we talked earlier how we view the multi-domain. I mean, if you look at the carrier air wing, as I just said, Tony, I mean, we're fighting on air, in air, on sea, and under the sea at all times. And I think Heather puts it perfectly, which is any sensor, any shooter. In the F-35 cockpit, push a button or find, fix your target, launch. It might come out of a U.S. Army hurt locker. It might come out of a Marine Corps Marine missile. You name it. I mean, that's the whole concept. I will segue real quickly because this is an item that the three of us have been talking about when it comes to childcare and the social services provided to our troops. They are our most valuable and they are our most expensive. One of the things that I struggled with 10 years ago on the Defense Business Board was, you know, we're warfighters, why do we have all these ancillary services that we're providing when in fact outside the wire there's a much more effective, a much more efficient delivery system. I want to make sure that our uniformed folks and our civilian teammates understand the true cost. If they want something, fine, we will supply it to them. But if they don't want something, please tell us so we can take those resources and apply them to where they want to be. You go on any base and my wife just came back when she first started traveling with me. She said, it's amazing when I ask to see what the resources are available. In some cases, there are 3 or 4 providers of the same resource and they're not talking to each other. If we can consolidate and coordinate and effectively use the resources to get what our troops and our civilian teammates need, that's the goal.
Great. Secretary Esper, Secretary Spencer, Secretary Wilson, thank you very much for your time today and for all you're doing for the nation. Please join me in a round of applause.
Thank you.